country once hailed as the paradise of consumption, where a short drive could get you everything you need, now a bundle of greens, a carton of eggs, or a few gallons of milk has become a luxury if you're living in America and feeling like grocery shopping is getting harder. It's not your imagination. It's real. And the issue is no longer just about prices. It's about the disappearance of the entire system. I never thought I'd ask myself, is this still the America I once knew? In 2025, as the food crisis in America became glaringly visible, poverty was no longer talked about as a natural result of unemployment or low income. Instead, the new phrase, poverty of choice, is what sent chills down people's spines. Over 1,600 supermarkets, once the backbone of urban life, disappeared within just 3 years. Not because of bombs, not because of earthquakes, but simply because they were no longer profitable in the eyes of those who control the supply chain. And the result, like a curse spreading wide, is that neighborhoods, once bustling and well-stocked, have become food deserts. Old buildings, windows covered in newspaper, for lease signs that never come down. I used to live in South Chicago, a place where being poor didn't mean filthy or broken. It meant surviving with resilience in a system that had abandoned you. I once saw an elderly woman walk over 3 kilometers for a loaf of bread and a liter of milk, not because she lacked money, but because she had no other choice. And the cruelest part is, when you talk about this injustice, people living in their safe zones will say, why not just order online? That seemingly simple statement exposes a society that's lost its empathy, because they don't realize that online doesn't exist everywhere, doesn't serve everyone. A 70-year-old man who doesn't know how to use a smartphone, living in an area not covered by Uber Eats, with no credit card to order from Amazon. For him, order online isn't a solution, it's mockery. I used to believe that technology would liberate people, but now I wonder, does it only liberate the rich while leaving behind an entire world no one even bothers to look at? Hunger isn't just in the stomach anymore, it's in the mind. When you look around and realize there's no place left to walk into and buy a proper meal. We're not dying from starvation. We're dying from the feeling of being forgotten. That kind of hunger runs deeper, and it's far more dangerous. And if a society that calls itself civilized can let millions of poor people walk miles just to buy vegetables, then what it's lacking isn't just supermarkets, but conscience. To those who think choice is a given, that food is an automatic right, step into places like Southside Chicago. When you see a child eating dry bread and calling it breakfast, you might realize poverty isn't always about money. It's about being silently and systematically stripped of the right to choose, and it's that silence that becomes the deadliest weapon. It kills without spilling a drop of blood. I arrived in Phoenix on a February morning. Dry air, a bright blue sky, and construction sites roaring in the city center, as if the American dream was still expanding. Brand new residential areas with sleek gates, endless golf courses, and rows of villas that look straight out of a magazine. Everything outside screams, this is a booming city. But then, just turning down a side street, a few minutes away from the main roads, I saw something completely different. A quiet, dusty neighborhood so silent it felt suffocating. No supermarket, no produce shop, just a few run-down convenience stores selling canned food, cheap snacks, and shelves full of soda. A bitter paradox laid bare, no explanation needed. At the heart of a growing city lies the hunger of those left behind. I met Mr. James, a veteran who served in Iraq. He stood by his door, holding a can of soup, and told me, every day I eat a bit of cereal in the morning, then this can at night. A few years ago there was a supermarket. Now there's nothing. I can't drive 10 miles to get groceries. And those stores nearby, just selling junk. I don't think that was a complaint. It was an indictment. Short, aching, and without a hint of bitterness. Maybe people no longer have the energy to resent, when the entire system has already decided they're no longer worth serving. Poverty in Phoenix isn't as visible as in Chicago. It's masked by the glossy paint of urbanization, by the new home for sale signs and startup-filled cafes. But underneath that shell is a terrifying imbalance. More houses are built, but not more places to buy real food. The elderly, low-income folks, people without vehicles, are slowly erased from the food distribution map, I wonder. Do modern cities no longer care about meals? When opening a Korean-Mexican fusion restaurant is easier than opening a fresh produce store? Phoenix is a city of sunshine, but dinner here feels cold as steel. It's not lacking in flash, it's lacking in life. Because without greens, without fruit, without fresh meat, what's left isn't a meal, it's a survival substitute. And even as just an outsider observing, I feel suffocated, realizing that this system didn't collapse because it failed. On the contrary, it runs efficiently by a clear logic. Where there's profit, there's service. Where there's no money, that place simply doesn't exist. I used to think justice was about distribution. Now I see, justice is about being acknowledged as existing. And if a city can turn a blind eye to thousands who can't find lettuce, then that's not progress, that's stratification. We're building taller homes, but the foundation, the people, is cracking. Maybe soon, Phoenix will keep looking stunning on Instagram, but behind that light, there are thousands of cold dinners and the silence of people no longer heard. And so hunger is no longer about the belly. It's the widening void between having and being noticed. New York, the undeniable symbol of wealth, glamour, and American ambition. A place where Broadway lights never go out, where skyscrapers rise like defiant declarations of global economic power. And yet, in that very place, I witnessed a scene that shook every belief I had in the so-called American dream. An elderly woman fumbling in front of the egg section in a small supermarket in the Bronx, flipping through $7 cartons of eggs, then pulling her hand back and walking away in silence. No one noticed, because in this city, the elderly were not designed to exist. They are remnants of an era New York no longer bothers to sustain. Prices here don't rise with regular inflation. They rise with the pace of gentrification. Ruthless urban renovations swallowing old neighborhoods with luxury developments. The bodegas where locals once bought cheap potatoes, vegetables, and rice are now replaced by organic juice bars. Healthy food shops where a single salad bowl costs enough to cover 3 days of electricity. While newcomers enter the city with platinum credit cards, longtime residents quietly exit. Not just their homes, but the system itself. I used to believe that in New York, as long as you worked hard, you could make it. What I didn't calculate was this. The system no longer lets you choose. No more supermarkets nearby. No more small shops to buy half a pound of groceries. Everything now runs on apps, subscriptions, pre-orders, QR codes. And if you don't have a fancy phone, stable internet, and a bank account, you're nobody. I met a middle-aged man working night shifts as a security guard in Queens. He told me, "I used to grab food after work from the shop at the corner. Now it's closed. I have to wait until the weekend, take a train almost an hour to get to a supermarket far away. Each trip feels like a hunting mission. What to buy, how much I can carry, and how to make it last 7 more days." Poverty in New York isn't obvious, but it suffocates. It's not poverty of money. It's poverty of conditions to live a normal life. This city can spend $1,000 on a night of wine in Manhattan, but can't ensure that seniors in the Bronx have eggs and milk for breakfast. GDP numbers, Michelin restaurants, AI startups. None of that can mask a truth. The elderly, the poor, those who can't keep up with this hyperspeed lifestyle, are being quietly phased out. And I ask myself, if a city like New York, the world's largest financial hub, can't guarantee the basic right to food for low-income residents, then what place can? Are we building cities exclusively for consuming individuals, treating everyone else as irrelevant exceptions? What happened to those who lived here for 30 years, paid taxes, raised kids, served their communities? Where are they now? In small rooms, eating canned food, riding subways across 3 stops to get vegetables, or silently retreating from a world they once helped build? New York doesn't starve from a lack of food, it starves from a lack of ethics. When you choose to open a $12 bubble tea shop instead of keeping an old grocery store serving long-time residents, you're not just shifting economics, you're rewriting the social structure, you're redefining who gets to live as a whole human being and who doesn't. In that context, an $8 carton of eggs isn't a shock, it's a warning to those who believe urbanization equals progress. No, it's only progress for some, and silent elimination for the rest. In silence, dryness, and legality, Birmingham, a name that sounds gentle, humble, evoking the charm of traditional Southern America, where life once moved at the pace of sweet tea afternoons and neighborly hellos. But in 2025, the very place that seemed immune to globalization's whirlwind became a bitter proof of something deeply lost in communal life. A place to buy food, and more broadly, a place to feel like you still exist. I didn't come to Birmingham to write a report. I came because of an old friend's invitation. And I never expected the most shocking thing wouldn't be the stats or food desert maps, but an empty hallway where a Piggly Wiggly store once stood, fondly known by locals as the neighborhood social station. Miss Margie, the elderly lady I first met during that trip, said something I'll never forget. "I don't need a fancy supermarket. I just need a place where I can talk to someone." I asked her why she didn't order online. She chuckled gently, as if my question was too naive, then replied, "Sweetheart, it's simple. When I order online, no one asks me how I'm doing today." That moment hit me harder than any economic analysis or financial report could, because in those small grocery stores, beyond the food, lives an emotional ecosystem, a web of human connections that holds a community together. But all of it was erased, not by bombs or war, but by numbers on Excel spreadsheets. Chains like Save-A-Lot, Winn-Dixie, and Piggly Wiggly shut down one after another. No announcements, no town halls, no community surveys, just one morning. Windows papered over, signs taken down, parking lots deserted, and in those empty spaces, isolation crept into every home. The elderly had nowhere to meet. People living alone had no one to talk to. The poor had nowhere left to buy safe, healthy food. The city remained calm, the streets stayed clean, the police still patrolled. But one thing was lost: the feeling of being seen. No more supermarkets meant no more morning greetings, no more how are yous, no more daily affirmations of "I'm still here." What chilled me wasn't an old woman having to catch 2 buses to buy a little rice. It was the fact that no one in that city thought it was a problem. I started wondering about a question that policymakers should have asked first. Should supermarkets, or more broadly, food access points, be considered part of public health care? Because if an elderly person goes a week without seeing anyone, without going anywhere, without speaking, are they really living? I don't think so. And in the disappearance of those spaces lies the clearest sign that we're building a society without empathy, cold and mechanical, where efficiency replaces humanity. When you see a city as a spreadsheet, you can easily eliminate a store because it no longer turns profit. But when you see a city as a living community, you'll understand that those small, inefficient places are what keep society from falling apart. Birmingham isn't lacking good people. It's lacking the places for those good people to find each other. And when we lose such places, what's left isn't a city. It's a cluster of disconnected, silent, and forgotten souls. An orderly urban space with no soul, a peaceful society with no warmth. That's not an economic failure, it's a moral one. St. Louis, a name once tied to America's industrial glory, a crossroads between East and West, where the currents of goods and people once converged from every direction. But St. Louis in 2025 is no longer a destination of hope. It is now a silent showcase of a chilling truth. Food isn't scarce. It's just the kind of food that breaks people down after every meal. The shelves aren't empty, but if you're looking for fresh greens, chemical-free fruits, or meat untouched by industrial processing, you'll start to realize that what's overflowing is really just fuel for temporary fullness, not nourishment. I visited a low-income neighborhood in the northern part of the city, where everyone knows each other, but no one truly trusts the food they're eating. A mother of 3 told me she has to choose discounted frozen pizza over fresh vegetables because it fills us up longer, it's cheaper, easier to cook. But that also means her 9-year-old son now suffers from stage 2 obesity and takes heart medication at a nearby school. Some students hadn't eaten fresh fruit in 3 months. What's terrifying is that no one finds it strange anymore. Because as long as we're eating, it's fine. We live in a society where the idea of food choice has been entirely distorted by the logic of supply chains and profit margins. Distribution networks push canned goods, fried snacks, chemically processed items, because they're easy to store, slow to spoil, and highly profitable. But vegetables, fresh fruits, clean meat, those spoil quickly, are expensive to ship, hard to preserve, so they're bumped off the priority list. The result is that the poor are trapped in a cycle. Whatever they eat makes their bodies more tired, more deficient, leading to illness, medical bills, and back to cheap food again. An inescapable loop. I once thought the biggest question in food insecurity was, are there any supermarkets left? But in St. Louis I learned there's an even crueler question. There is a supermarket, but what's inside it? When you walk into a store packed with instant noodles, sugary drinks, frozen sausages, and salty snacks, you don't feel hunger. But the hunger isn't in your stomach. It's in the fact that you're being sustained by food that slowly depletes you every day, so subtly that no one notices. A slow poisoning disguised as convenience. Sitting in a small cafe, watching people pass by, I wondered, maybe the government doesn't need to ban anyone to control society. They just need to provide cheap, empty-calorie food and let the lullaby play on. People eat like that, get tired, get sick, lose the energy to fight back, and accept life as a replica of some pre-packaged menu. This isn't just about food anymore. It's about the right to be healthy, the right to choose, the right to live meaningfully. Rights that the poor in St. Louis are being denied without anyone officially admitting it. You might think I'm being extreme, but if you've ever eaten instant noodles 3 nights in a row and woke up feeling exhausted and empty, you'd understand that fatigue doesn't come from work. It comes from a system that's stuffing your body with things it knows you shouldn't eat, but still sells, still advertises, and still labels as a solution for the low income. We're witnessing a transformation from not eating enough to eating without enough. And St. Louis is the vivid portrait of that trend, where people still buy food but are slowly losing life. It's hunger in a way that doctors, psychologists, and ethicists can't easily define, because it's not urgent enough to raise alarm, but it's steady enough to kill, quietly, orderly, and in that order, who's guilty, who's dying, and most importantly, how many of us will realize it before we become part of the statistics? Fresno, a name that sounds small, modest, maybe even forgettable. If your image of California begins and ends with glamorous Los Angeles or glittering San Francisco. But to those who've studied agricultural geography, Fresno is more than a city. It's the beating heart pumping millions of tons of produce into America's food system every year. Tomatoes, grapes, almonds, melons, onions. Fresno grows enough of them to feed entire countries. And yet, in a cruel, bitter irony, the very people who live among these fields often can't afford a single bunch of clean greens, a crisp apple, or a handful of unbruised tomatoes. I once thought living in an agricultural hub meant cheap, abundant, fresh food. Then I met Carlos, a fruit picker who works 10-hour days under 100-degree sun. He told me his dinner is often white rice and canned beans, not because he can't cook, but because the nearest supermarket no longer sells fresh vegetables. To buy any, he'd need to drive 25+ minutes. But he has no car, and the bus only runs twice a day, 6 hours apart. He gave a sad smile and said, "I harvest melons all day, but I haven't eaten a fresh one in 2 months." This isn't an isolated story. It's a system run by the logic of profit maximization. After harvest, the produce doesn't stay local. It's sorted, packed, and shipped to Los Angeles, San Diego, New York, or exported to Asia and Europe, wherever the purchasing power is strongest. That's where the supply goes. Fresno, despite being the source, is not seen as an ideal market by distributors. Local prices aren't high enough. Residents don't buy in bulk. So tons of fruits and vegetables pass right by their windows, but never reach their dinner plates. There's a painful irony in seeing fields full of ripe crops, while the nearest convenience store only sells canned food, soda, and chips. Fresno doesn't lack food. It lacks access to food. It's like someone who mines gold but still eats porridge every night because they can't afford bread. This isn't traditional poverty. It's poverty by exclusion, cut off from the very value chain they sustain. I asked myself, is Fresno truly poor? Or is it simply deemed unworthy of being served? While big supermarkets open in fancy urban districts for customers who can choose between organic grapes or Italian imported almonds, the laborers who harvest those grapes are buying fruit imported from China, because what they produce is too premium for their own budgets. When the people feeding the system can't eat what they grow, that's not just injustice, it's systemic humiliation. And I can't help but wonder, if a national agricultural powerhouse like Fresno can't guarantee healthy meals for its own residents, then what place in America possibly can? sustainably. We've turned the food supply chain into a machine that's too smart, too efficient. It's forgotten what people are. It no longer cares about community, distance, or ethics. It only measures by profit margins, storage costs, and consumption yield. And the result is this: farmers, workers, and local families in Fresno, surrounded by plenty, yet starving for real nourishment. Fresno doesn't need charity. They don't need pity. They need recognition that they are a vital part of the system, that they deserve to eat what they grow, that they deserve to be served with dignity, not surplus inventory. And if that's too much to ask in an economy like America's, then maybe the problem isn't Fresno. Maybe the problem is in the very system we keep calling progress. Atlanta, once celebrated as the shining symbol of the American South's resurgence, a city that led waves of innovation, creativity, and multicultural growth. Its booming economy spurred sleek new neighborhoods, upscale real estate projects sprawling across vacant lots, and a flood of world-class restaurants, cafes, gyms, and art centers popping up like mushrooms after rain. But if you step outside the glossy brochures, if you dare turn away from the streets where tech workers and investors gather, you'll see a different Atlanta, quieter, confused, and hungry. Not hungry in the old-fashioned sense, but a distinctly 21st century kind of hunger. Hunger amid abundance, hunger within prosperity, hunger right in the heart of development. I walked past a row of pristine new apartments in East Atlanta, where the rent for a 2-bedroom unit had doubled in just 3 years, and right across the street was an empty lot, once a neighborhood supermarket, now nothing but a broken sign and cracked concrete. Residents told me it used to be the central market for the area, standing for over 30 years. Then one day, without warning or farewell, it was wiped out to make room for urban redevelopment. They call it progress. I call it severing the artery that fed the community. The truth is, from 2021 to 2025, more than 50 supermarkets and small grocery stores vanished from Atlanta, mostly in middle and low-income neighborhoods. Places that were once community anchors, where people shopped, talked, and built relationships, were replaced by sleek boutique chains, specialty coffee shops, and bakeries where a single croissant costs as much as a working family's meal. I'm not against development. But when development means higher rent, pricier homes, more profit for investors, while longtime residents are left with nowhere to buy vegetables or a bag of rice, that's not progress. That's displacement. People like to say, Atlanta is transforming. But who's being transformed? Who's being moved? And who's being left behind? I met a 29-year-old medical resident who told me she drives to the suburbs every week for groceries because her new apartment complex has no normal food stores nearby, only Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, or online delivery services, which require a car, a credit card, and a minimum order for free shipping. Those who live alone, the elderly, the low income, they fall off the target customer list. And when no one serves you, you cease to exist in the local economy. What's strange about Atlanta is that the city is not poor, but healthy food is becoming a privilege. To buy clean groceries, you need a car. To save money, you need a Costco membership. To find green vegetables within walking distance, nearly impossible. I once saw an elderly man walk over 2 miles under a 100-degree summer sun to reach a store that sold only canned food and snacks. When I asked why he didn't go to a farther supermarket, he said, "I can't drive. And if I take a cab, the fare equals the cost of groceries." And that's when I realized, in Atlanta, people aren't starving. They're being pushed into eating in ways that erode both body and spirit. Not because they choose to eat poorly, but because they have no other choice. The food system here isn't shaped by community needs. It's shaped by investment zoning. And when food is valued by square footage instead of nutrition, this is what happens. Those who can't afford it are forced to eat worse, live shorter, and disappear faster. Death by development has never moved so quickly. And Atlanta, for all its polished exterior, is leading the charge. A city of the future, where modernity rises, but the basic meal regresses to the past. When homes get bigger, cars get flashier, but bodies get weaker, and illnesses rise. Something is systemically wrong, and if we don't face it, soon the whole society will wake up in a world where a clean, healthy meal is no longer a need, but a dream. Denver, a peaceful capital nestled within the Rocky Mountains, long thought to be the ideal place to settle down, retire, or simply escape the chaos and slow life down, to breathe fresh air, reconnect with nature. But Denver in 2025 is facing a bitter contradiction, not due to food shortages, not due to a lack of stores, but because the cost of bringing food into the city has risen so high it's choking the very people who chose it for balance and peace. I'm not talking about the wealthy folks on hilltop estates with panoramic valley views. They still drive their SUVs, still get organic deliveries from Whole Foods. I'm talking about teachers, office workers, retirees, people who once lived comfortably on a middle-class income, now weighing every grocery decision, not because their salaries dropped, but because food transport costs have soared. From 2021 to 2025, logistics expenses for bringing goods into Denver rose by 68%. Winding mountain roads, heavy snow in winter, sky-high gas prices, driver shortages, supply chain delays, all stack up into a cost no one saw coming. A bag of frozen vegetables here can now cost more than organic produce in the next state over, I used to think. If it's expensive, just buy less, eat simpler. But no one told me that simpler here often means not enough. An elderly woman in Littleton told me she used to buy fresh milk for under $3 a week. Now it's over $5, and the store near her closed down because it couldn't keep regular stock. She has to wait for her daughter to drive her to Walmart on weekends, if her daughter's busy. She eats white bread sandwiches with processed cheese all week. Not dead, but tired, she said. And that's when I began to ask, why can't a modern city, with an international airport, electric train systems, booming tech and finance hubs, ensure its residents have simple, balanced meals? Here's the answer. Denver hasn't grown as a self-sustaining city. It's grown as a consumption hub. Food isn't produced here. Everything, from fruits to meat, travels hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles to reach store shelves. And that system, once praised for its convenience and efficiency, is now collapsing under its own cost. Residents now must choose. Fill up the gas tank to get to work, or spend an extra $50 per week just to afford what used to be standard groceries, a carton of milk, a few apples, some chicken, all now budget puzzles. And what shocks me most is how calm people have become. It's part of the new normal, an abnormality masked by neutral language. Prices went up a little, but it's okay. No, it's not okay. When a city makes people cut back on vegetables to afford fuel, when kids eat less fruit not because they hate it but because their parents can't afford it, when seniors must choose between fresh food and prescription meds, that's not a consumer issue, it's a moral one. A society that permits this, rationalizes it, and calls it part of the market, is a society drifting away from its responsibility to the very people who built it. Denver, with its mild climate, with its reputation as a livable city, is now being unmasked by freight costs and industrial-scale food logistics. A beautiful city that can't feed its people. A modern metropolis where fresh vegetables are priced like luxury goods. And sadly, it's not the exception. It's the blueprint for the future, where meals no longer depend on human need, but on how far goods can travel across states, and when transport becomes the main barrier to survival. Death doesn't come from hunger. It comes from silence, resignation, and the quiet fading of those who fall off the map, in silence, in civility, and in a fatigue too deep to fight back. Detroit, once etched into the American psyche as a mighty emblem of industrialization, the birthplace of the automobile, the city that once boasted the highest median income in the nation, a place where being a factory worker was enough to raise a family, buy a home, and send your kids to college. But that was the past, a past that's been flipped over, boxed up, and pushed off the mental map of modern America. Detroit today is no longer a car manufacturing powerhouse. It's a generator of grim statistics. Nearly 70% of residents no longer have a supermarket within walking distance. A city with no place to buy food. Sounds like dystopian fiction, but it's real. And the cruelest part is, it happened slowly, quietly, legally, and no one took responsibility. I walked through neighborhoods that once stood as the pride of Detroit's black working class. Rows of aging wood frame homes, overgrown yards, shattered windows, crooked signs reading, Food Mart, coated in dust. Maybe 10 years ago, this place was still open. A few vegetable stands, some old freezers with frozen meat. Now, just stray cats and memories remain. What pierced me wasn't the decay, it was how normalized disappearance has become. People here no longer blink when a store closes. They don't protest, they don't rally, they adapt because they're used to being left behind. After the financial crisis and the city's 2013 bankruptcy, Detroit became a high-risk investment zone in the eyes of major retail chains. Low incomes, high crime, expensive insurance, all reasons for companies like Kroger, Meijer, and even Walmart to pull out. No one replaced them. Local co-ops lacked the capital to survive. Food delivery startups steered clear of red zones, and so hundreds of thousands, mostly elderly, people of color, and low-income residents, were trapped in a city where even bread requires a commute. I once asked a middle-aged man living on the west side, "Where do you buy groceries?" He pointed to 3 worn plastic bags. Inside were instant noodles, frozen hot dogs, soda, the gas station down the street. "That's it," he replied. I didn't need to ask more. His answer wasn't just for me. It was for an entire system that's turned its back on those who no longer hold consumer value. Detroit didn't die because it ran out of money. It died because it was redefined as a place unworthy of investment. And that is the softest execution capitalism knows how to deliver. No bombs, no bulldozers, just pulling the plug on those too broke to keep the machine running. The city still has houses, electricity, people, but no longer life. Meals are no longer moments of connection, but acts of survival. A piece of fried chicken, a soda, a serving of fries. That's dinner for many families here. And what's terrifying is that, over time, people accept it as the new normal. When hunger no longer feels like pain but numbness, there's nothing left to save. Detroit is not just a dot on the map, it's a prophecy. Because if one of America's wealthiest cities can now be a place without a produce aisle, what lies ahead for the rest? When supply chains are ruled by profit, when supermarkets are no longer public service but investment portfolios, what's happening in Detroit today could be tomorrow's fate elsewhere. A society where buying eggs is a journey, a nation where bread is pricier than gas, a civilization where those who built it are now reduced to size and red-lined zoning maps. I didn't come to Detroit looking for tragedy, but I left haunted, because if the death of a city can happen this silently, what's left for us amid glowing economic reports and optimistic consumer indexes? How many more places are dangling by the thread of fate, unaware that the missing meal each day is the quiet tightening of a noose? And when we finally realize it, will we still have time to resist? Miami, the city of eternal sun, golden beaches, and vibrant Art Deco hotels, a place synonymous with vacation, music, and oceanfront nightlife. But behind the dazzle, behind the color and the buzz, lies a growing, undeniable truth. Miami isn't hungry because it's poor. Miami is hungry because nature no longer plays nice, and people still naively believe that food supply chains are forever untouchable. When Hurricane Ian struck, the entire city went dark for days. I can't forget the sight. Massive food warehouses flooded, delivery trucks stalled, and residents swarming corner stores, fighting over the last boxes of instant noodles. But what haunts me wasn't the chaos. It was the fact that it happened again just months later, during Hurricane Idalia. 2 storms, 2 total breakdowns of logistics, 2 reminders that even a city with one of the nation's highest GDPs can suddenly face a primal fear. Having nothing to eat, I met a young mother standing outside a closed supermarket after the storm. She held her baby and said, exhausted, "One heavy rain and we lose everything. From power to milk, from vegetables to medicine, and no one explains anything." Miami doesn't lack food. It's just dangerously reliant on a stability the climate no longer guarantees. Winter cold up north is annual. It can be planned for. But in Florida, a single rogue storm topples the entire logistics chain like dominoes. And what falls isn't just food, but peace of mind and the right to live like a normal citizen. I used to think climate change was about the future, the next generation's problem. But it's already knocking on every kitchen door. Each time the power goes out, refrigeration fails, produce spoils, meat is dumped. The cost isn't felt by corporations. It lands squarely on the shoulders of people, especially those without a car to drive out of town, without savings to stock up for a week, without strong internet to order online. And every time it happens, prices spike 15 to 20%. That's when a tomato becomes a luxury item. A bundle of greens costs as much as antibiotics. Seniors must choose between eggs and blood pressure pills. Working families choose between breakfast and gas for work. And the worst part, this doesn't just happen once. It recurs like clockwork. Every storm season, heavier each year, Miami is a city full of promise. But without a food system that adapts to climate change, everything else is surface, high-end restaurants, luxury hotels, million-dollar resorts. None of it matters when a simple dinner for a family of 4 becomes uncertain. And the greatest danger isn't scarcity. It's the self-delusion that we'll be fine. We won't be. Not unless we rebuild the entire food system on a new reality. The weather is no longer stable, nature is no longer gentle, and people can no longer be passive victims of a supply chain as fragile as thread. ChatGPT said, "The next storm may not have arrived yet, but Miami, and hundreds of other coastal cities, remain dangerously dependent on a centralized, fragile distribution system, one that turns every meal into a fleeting miracle, ready to vanish with the next 3 days of rain." I don't want to live in a society where a loaf of bread becomes a symbol of crisis simply because it rained for a weekend. But if we don't face that truth now, then soon, it won't just be Miami. It will be all of America stepping into an era where fresh vegetables, cold milk, and clean meat exist only in the memories of a generation that once believed food was a given. But it's not. Nothing is guaranteed. Especially not when nature has begun to call in debts humanity never planned to repay. And when I look back, from the scorched sidewalks of Southside Chicago, to the lifeless aisles in St. Louis, to the flooded supermarkets in Miami, I realize something no one dares say aloud. The supermarket crisis in America in 2025 is no longer isolated, no longer just a problem of the poor, the marginalized, or the remote. It is a systemic erosion, spreading like a silent hairline crack beneath concrete, slow but certain. A breakdown not as loud as riots, not as shocking as a stock market crash, but one with consequences deeper than any financial crisis we've known. The issue is not just a lack of places to buy eggs or greens. It's the fact that a nation once proud of having the world's most advanced logistics system has failed to secure one simple thing: that every person should be able to access decent food nearby, at a fair price, without needing tech, memberships, or having to beg charity. When a 70-year-old woman has to sit on a bus for 2 hours just to buy a bag of rice, we are no longer talking about commerce. We are talking about the collapse of the very idea of the right to live in a modern society. There's a strange thing I can't shake. The more cities I visit, the more I feel something essential is being quietly erased from the urban landscape. The feeling of belonging, when local supermarkets disappear, when traditional markets are replaced by imported boutiques, when you no longer know your grocer, no longer handpick onions or chat over change, but instead receive automated receipts and delivery texts from faceless drivers. You're no longer living in a community. You're surviving in a consumption chain, where your identity is a customer ID, nothing more. We once believed modernization, digitization, optimization would liberate us, but in truth it's deleting those who can't keep up, like broken files unworthy of fixing. The elderly who don't use apps go hungry. Those without cars can't eat vegetables. Those who can't spend $150 in one go for a smart bulk deal must buy overpriced single items from corner stores. So who exactly is failing to adapt? The people? Or the system designed only for the fast, the rich, the tech-savvy? I don't write these words out of despair. I write them to remind us. No civilized society should treat meals as an afterthought. No sustainable future builds luxury restaurants beside neighborhoods without greens. No economy deserves pride if it grows millions of tons of food while those harvesting, packing, and transporting it eat instant noodles because the store's too far. If you can walk 5 minutes and buy fresh produce, meat, eggs, please understand, you are in the minority. And if you've never worried about where your next meal will come from, not because of poverty, but because you don't know where to buy it, don't take that for granted. Look closely at your neighborhood, that corner store you visit weekly, the elderly folks pushing carts down the block, And ask, will they still be there next year? And will you speak up when the last little market is bulldozed to make way for another shopping complex for the young and wealthy? Food crises don't always come from drought or war. Sometimes they begin with indifference, with economically rational but socially unethical decisions, with the way we silently watch the final supermarket on our block shut down and never ask why. And by the time we realize what it meant, it may be too late to reverse. What's already lost may never be recovered, but what's still left must be protected. Not just because it's food, but because it's the last thread holding us together in a society cracking apart while thinking it's progressing. Don't wait until a loaf of bread becomes a relic of the past to understand. Losing a supermarket is losing part of a city's soul. And when that happens, all that's left is the wind blowing through abandoned aisles and stories no one wants to hear anymore. When a bunch of greens becomes a luxury, not because supply is low, but because access is broken. When eating is no longer a right, but a negotiation of finances, distance, survival within a closed system. That's not a singular crisis. That's a full-scale restructuring of how we define living. The cruel irony is, while technology makes everything easier, eating is becoming harder. You can summon a car to your door in 3 minutes, but can't find a fresh tomato within a kilometer. You might get thousands of likes on a photo of your gourmet dinner, while quietly eating things that slowly destroy your body. We're living in a world where food experiences are digitized, commercialized, but the physical infrastructure, markets, sources, freshness, is shrinking, disappearing. The problem is no longer is food grown, it's who gets to eat it and who doesn't. For the elderly without smartphones, for immigrant laborers living in cramped dorms, for single mothers with no car, no spare time, a meal isn't a choice, it's submission. It's buying whatever's left on the shelf. It's eating to feel full, not to stay well. And the most terrifying part? When that state lingers long enough, it becomes the new normal. A way of life that's nutritionally poor, rights poor, choice poor, rationalized through cold statistics and polished policy language. And then will come a day, maybe next year, maybe sooner, when no one remembers the supermarket that once stood at the corner, when a child grows up never having seen their mother choose a fresh apple at a stall, when we teach each other that clean vegetables are what you order from an app, delivered by someone you'll never meet. That's not progress, that's disconnection. That's losing the final bond between people and food, between the body and the community. The question is no longer when will the supermarket return, but do we even need them anymore? If we've accepted apps, delivery bots, and warehouses hundreds of miles away to take their place. I'm not against technology, but I oppose forced trade-offs. Where an elder must live in a city with everything except a place to buy fresh vegetables. Maybe you've never faced that situation. Maybe your neighborhood still has stores, markets, supermarkets. But trust me, that won't last forever, because what we're losing doesn't vanish overnight. It unravels slowly. Today, a small store. Tomorrow, a local supermarket. Next week, the final distribution hub. And when you look back, there's nothing left to hold on to. So if you still have choice, protect it. Not by consuming more, but by asking questions. Why did this shop close? Why is there no market here? Why is food sold only in places the poor can't reach? And most of all, if I stay silent, who will speak for me? A bundle of greens won't spark a revolution, but a society that treats meals as privilege, not as right, is already set to destroy itself from the inside. No bombs needed, just indifference, and every empty bread shelf is a soft warning. But if no one listens, it will become the final sound of a community that was fed on illusions and starved in reality. You've listened, now it's your turn to share, not to complain but to remind. Don't let a wealthy country become so poor in empathy that a meal becomes a luxury, because in that moment, all our so-called progress is just a mask, and the collapse will come from the most unexpected place. An empty stomach. If this video made you pause, share it with someone you love, not to spread fear, but to see clearly what we're losing. Leave a comment. Your story may be someone else's comfort, and don't forget to subscribe for more honest, human reflections on a world changing faster than we know.